Hi guys, so today's video is going to be both a non-spoiler book review and a spoilery chat for Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is book 2 in the First Law trilogy, but if you haven't read the first one, no worries, I won't be giving away any spoilers in the non-spoiler portion for the first or this second one. When I read the first book, I felt it was extremely character-driven, and I had a fair amount of people who felt that they would say it's not really character-driven, you just don't know what the plot is yet. So I was very curious to see when I picked up this second one if I would feel differently. I can safely say after reading this second one, and I may have already started the third one, I do not agree. I still think this is extremely character driven. I come back to the story for the characters. When I came back to the second book, I felt like I was coming home, like I was visiting, I was about to say like I was visiting friends, but if these people are my friends, I have some very twisted, dark, violent friends. I don't know that I've seen too many authors do character work the way that Joe Abercrombie does. The growth that you see in the characters is, oh my gosh, it's so good. And sometimes the declining of certain characters. Also, the way in which you find yourself really attached to people sometimes that aren't really very good people or who are doing really dark things, and you kind of excuse it because you're like, oh, but I just love this character so much. And I don't find I can feel that way about characters that aren't done well. It's because you're seeing morally gray characters at their finest, and you're seeing grimdark at its finest when people talk about how Joe Abercrombie is the king of grimdark. I 100% agree. I find a lot of times grimdark is a little too dark for me in that it kind of relies on shock value, or like, look how gross and violent this is, or isn't the world so dark and bleak? Look, it's so awful. And this world does feel bleak, and there are lots of dark, violent things, but I don't feel like I'm ever seeing somebody trying to horrify me. Talking about the things that I think could be potential elements that not everybody's going to enjoy. The fact that it's so character-driven. If you are a plot-driven reader, that might bug you. The first one, even for me, took me a long time to get into. Characters are very much pulled along though by other, often superiors of theirs, telling them what to do or pulling them along with whatever it is they're trying to obtain. So our characters don't have a ton of agency, and that might bug some people. Most of the time our characters are they're just trying not to die. Also, in the first book, there were quite a few times that our characters were witnessing the conversations of what I would say were kind of more important people than them when it comes to the military or when it comes to nobility, things like that. They would be present while important things were happening, and they'd be listening to it. And the first book, it's not, I guess you could say I wasn't really following that much, but it was more that I just didn't care. I didn't really feel like I had a reason to care, and our characters often didn't really care. They were just around while these conversations were happening. When I picked up the second book, I was expecting to care more about those conversations because I had more context, but I didn't. That is one thing about these books that I'm finding, is sometimes we spend a really long time watching other people talk to each other. The magic in this story is not fleshed out, and a lot of times when the characters are introduced to something that has to do with the magic, they are kind of in disbelief because they don't really have a ton of exposure with it. And so it feels very magical. It feels very much like it's like how we would think of magic in our own world. We don't really believe it. There's a lot of skepticism around it. That's how it is for a lot of the characters. But a con for some people is that a lot of individuals have come to really love that in fantasy. They like seeing a certain class of individuals who are magic users. You see really cool laws, and you see all these different ways in which the magic plays a role and stuff. And it's not really the case with this story. The different facets of the world building are also things that I think some people will love and then some people won't really like. So a lot of times when it comes to the descriptions of things, when he writes descriptions, they're fantastic. And what I like is I never feel like he's describing anything that has little relevance to the story. If he's describing something, it's because the characters are encountering it. So in the first book, you find that there's an area that multiple characters are living in, and you don't get much of a description of that particular area. But then at some point, somebody who is not living there comes there and then you get a huge description of what this place looks like. It is my favorite kind of way to talk about what things look like in stories, because otherwise, for me, it pulls me out of the story. If it's something that's extremely familiar to the characters, it wouldn't make sense for these characters to then give you long paragraphs about what things that are familiar to them look like. But if a character is being newly introduced to something, you're going to look around, you're going to observe, and that's what it feels like. It feels like the descriptions, they have relevance to the characters. This is probably going to be a con for some people because you don't feel particularly grounded in a lot of the story for a long time in that first book because you don't find that one individual comes to this place until way later. That's just one example. And that kind of stuff, I would say, isn't so present in the second book because most of the second book, the settings are new to the characters, so you get way more descriptions. That is something that I think contrasted from the first book. That does mean that the second book is a bit more of a traveling story. If you don't like traveling stories, you might not like that element of this book, but the fact that it's so character-driven, it doesn't really matter to me if the characters are in one place or if they're traveling all over the place because I'm just there for them. As for the history and the lore of this world, how all the significant things that a lot of our characters, you can tell these things have been hinted at subtly, they're gonna lead to something bigger later, and probably something extremely big by the end. Those things are super heavy-handed. They're pretty much always one person asking this one particular character who doesn't have a point of view, really. They ask him, hey, so what's up with this anyway? Can you explain? And then this character, he just tells them basically a story. That's how almost every form of the lore is presented to you. At the end of the day, I don't really care because I like the story so much and I like the characters so much, but that might bug some people. The last thing I want to touch on in the non-spoiler part would be the action scenes. So some of the action scenes are more single character or two characters, things like that, and how they are trying to survive fighting for their lives. And then other times you have battles, which obviously people are fighting for their lives in those too, but it's a much bigger scale. And there was one particular battle where I had been listening to the audiobook and I was doing something and I just had to stop and marvel because there are not too many battle sequences that I have found in stories that the tension, the stakes, everything are so well done as they were with this one. I was captivated. It was fantastic. That said, I don't care that much about every single one of the action scenes. Sometimes I feel like the action scenes, they definitely are a good change of pace, but they don't always feel like the stakes are that high. Sometimes I just feel like it's an opportunity for us to see how really awesome and intense some of our characters are. I might like those ones to be a little shorter because when it's a scene that feels like the whole purpose of it is to watch a character basically go into rage mode, that's cool, but clearly the character is destroying everybody, so I don't know if I need them to destroy everybody for a super long time for a lot of pages or anything. It's like, okay, they're doing work. Also, they're coming out of it basically unscathed, so I lied a little bit ago. I said that was the last thing I was going to touch on, but I do want to say the narrator for these books is the best narrator I have come across. Oh my gosh, the way they do so many different accents, the characterization that they have, the subtle things they do to bring these characters to life is amazing. I don't bring up narrators really very often, but I highly recommend checking out the narrator. Oh my gosh, is he amazing. I am going to be getting into spoilers now, so if you don't want to be spoiled, stop watching now. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the character growth that we see in Giselle. I found, when I read the first one, I was like, I hate this guy. But I mean, that's kind of the point, I think, with him, because he's so arrogant. And I saw somebody comment and they said they actually kind of love Giselle because he's so stupid. And they kind of can't help but just love to read about what an idiot he is. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, actually I agree with that. Because you do feel things when you read about him, you find yourself having all these emotions, but at the end of the day, I'm still kind of entertained by him. And in this book, I loved seeing him go from this pompous, just thinks so highly of himself and so little of other people. I liked seeing that just be demolished, because in their little merry party, as they're trekking along, they they encounter some situations where he realizes, I'm useless. And I loved, that sounds so morbid, but I loved seeing him realize how he's not that great. When he was injured, okay, that whole part after he was injured and he's starting to recover, which I do want to say, that was one thing that confused me. He recovers really fast. Anyway, that doesn't really matter, but the recovery process and what he's thinking while he's recovering, and you're starting to see him reflect for the first time. He realizes, oh my gosh, I've never ever once in my life done a selfless deed. And him having that realization and then thinking, I'm going to try to be better to everybody. I really loved that epiphany. Although I did really enjoy when he overheard Pharaoh and Nine Fingers being intimate, and he was like, those savages, and all his bad thoughts about them just come flooding back, and then at the end of it, he's just like, I'm so lonely. That part was hilarious. Speaking of Nine Fingers, my heart. He is such a big softie. He's so adorable. In the first one, I feel like we really didn't see that very much because he's alone for so long, and then he's with Baez, and eventually he gets around to being around other characters, but we don't see him interact with a lot of other people. And it's funny because the reputation he has is so different from how he actually is. I think a lot of his reputation is tied into this rage monster he turns into, but him as a person, he's such a big softie, and he's a little bit of a scaredy cat, but he's also just this big brute, and I love me a big softie. Pharaoh, of course, is so much the opposite of that, and I really liked that you do see her gaining some additional humanity. She has humanity, but she is so overwhelmed by the desire to get her revenge, and her whole life has been filled with violence and filled with this hatred towards these people that took her and killed her people. So I feel like her hatred, if she had abandoned it super easily, that just wouldn't have made sense. It's sad that she is so angry and that she has such a hard time being a person and enjoying human interaction, but I appreciate that it wasn't like her and Nine Fingers were together for a very short amount of time and all of a sudden she's just like a changed woman or anything. I feel like that would have it would have discredited everything about her character, I think. I really liked the way Joe Abercrombie handled her character. I do find myself frustrated with the two of them because I want them to just run off into the sunset and live happily ever after and stop with the war and the vengeance. Switching gears for a sec, so the battle that I loved so much was the one where the most aggravating character ever, the prince, when he is like, no, we have to go charge, we have to get them now, and he's just a complete idiot, and everything is ruined, and all these people are dying, and everybody's trying to run away and escape. That whole portion, I was just so awed about that whole part because it was just so well done. It felt so high stakes. Like my pulse, I feel like, was higher. And I don't know that I've hated too many characters more. So when West killed him, that was one of the best, like, yes moments, because I was a little nervous for like half a sec. I was like, come on, man, I know you've worked really hard, and I know that you will do probably pretty well if you bring back this prince alive and everything and you rescue him, but he is awful. So when he pushed him off that cliff, I was like, yes, thank you. Saving the best for last is Glokta. I don't know that I even have a ton to say about him. In the first book's review, I talked about how much I loved Glokta because I love him. I think if he was a real person, I wouldn't feel this way, but as a reader reading about a fictional person, I love him. I still love him. His plotline was the most random out of all of them because he wasn't really that involved with the other characters, but I didn't care. I mean, you could just have Glokta talking about, he can just literally be sitting on a tree stump thinking about how achy he is and how the world sucks, and I'd be like, doesn't it? Anyway, that is it for my book review and chat for Before They Are Hanged. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Let me know who your favorite character is in this story, if you liked it better than the first, how you like it overall within the trilogy. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.